Spectacular Spider-Man is a far smarter show than you might have thought. A while back I made a couple of videos on the Spectacular Spider-Man series, mostly focusing on the first season, and the way its themes and narratives operate, and I enjoyed making them, and evidently you guys enjoyed watching them, so I'm back with a video I've wanted to make for a while, all about the show's second season. So yes, spoiler warning for a show over a decade old, I guess. But what I want to talk about specifically today is the school play, and the really intelligent ways such a seemingly innocuous plot point actually forms a pretty significant part of the second season's narrative and thematic complexities. In case you've forgotten, here's a summary of what went down. Starting in the episode Growing Pains, we learnt that Peter's school, M-Cubed, is putting on a play, and from the episode Identity Crisis, we know that the play in question is William Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. And while all the other stuff is going on in the show's foreground, the web slinging, the villain team-ups, the gang wars, we also see snatches here and there of students auditioning, learning lines, rehearsing, and so forth. Now, the main narrative impact of the play, other than kicking off a few minor high school subplots, is probably the most obvious one of the things I'll be talking about in this video, and it comes in the episode opening night, as the kids are performing the big show, and one of the leads, Harry Osborn, is nowhere to be seen. Peter isn't there either, of course. He got called away on official Spider-Man business, and ended up getting locked in a supervillain jail, as you do. But something wicked this way comes. It turns out that Green Goblin's back, and seems to be orchestrating Spidey's woes. And while he does, he's speaking exclusively in rhyming couplets.
So, Goblin wasn't the only sprite to use the vault for mischief tonight.
Green Goblin's been in the show before, and after a bit of uncertainty, it seemed to be the case that in this world Harry was the Goblin, powered up and sent nuts by his addiction to an experimental formula. But here's the rub, the show's finale complicates this. Again, spoiler warning because this one's pretty big. It turns out Harry's father Norman was the Goblin all along, and had been framing his own son this whole time. In some ways, the Goblin's identity is the central mystery of the show, but in this episode, just before that big reveal, we see the show pulling out all the stops to mislead the viewers, to muddy the waters for the audience, because the whole time that Goblin's flying around, causing mischief and speaking in some pretty Shakespearean rhyming couplets, the show is cutting to the school, intermittently showing us vignettes from the big performance. Hobie Brown had stepped in to play Harry's role, since he didn't show, and his costume, the one Harry was due to wear, is a spitting image of Gobby. There's even a point where Goblin directly quotes a line from the play.
Shall we their fond pageant see? Lord, what fools these mortals be!
Let me explain why this is genius. At this point, going into the finale, Peter is convinced Harry's the Goblin, and he's got every reason to think so, but the finale itself isn't a straightforward plot twist. There's misdirect after misdirect until Peter doesn't know what to think, and the thing is, neither do we. The impact of this previous episode, then, lies in the way it eliminates any dramatic irony, because after seeing Goblin flying around, speaking in couplets, and quoting Harry's lines, we're dragged down into the same misguided certainty as Peter. Going into the finale, we too are convinced Harry is the Goblin. So when the mystery heats up next episode, when the revelations start coming, we are on the edge of our seats along with Spidey until that big final reveal. So yeah, that's the obvious impact the play has on the show, but let's get a little deeper because there's far more to it than that. I'd like to move on to how the play matters thematically to the Spectacular Spider-Man second season, but first let's take stock of where we are by this penultimate episode. I think the major driving theme of Season 2 is identity. It's a season about the facades we build within ourselves, and about discovering or rediscovering what lies beneath, which often turns out to be a truer self. The question these episodes seem to be asking their characters is your current identity an authentic representation of what you do and what you want? And if not, what will you risk? What will you give up to change that? This central theme is nothing new for Spider-Man. It's not even new for this show, but it really comes into the forefront in Season 2, through stories like the re-emergence of the question of Harry's identity, or the episode Identity Crisis, in which the world seemingly finds out Peter Parker's secret. Maybe the biggest disconnect between inner feelings and outer appearances, though, bigger even than the Peter Parker Spider-Man dichotomy, lies in the romantic lives of our main characters. Peter's with Liz, but deep down he likes Gwen. Gwen's with Harry, Harry, but her heart belongs to Peter. This is a source of immense strife, particularly for Peter throughout the season, and since this is a character whose whole deal is that he's able to withstand the misery caused by living a double life, and the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune which come alongside this, it's far from a foregone conclusion that he and Gwen will end up together, or even just open up to each other. The truth does come out in the final episode, but one of the functions of the play is to foreshadow this over 5 episodes earlier. Because the play being performed, A Midsummer Night's Dream, is a tale all about the woes of publicly being with the wrong romantic partner. Hermia is linked to Demetrius by her father's will and by the state, but she loves Lysander, who loves her also, but Demetrius still wants to be with her. Things are miserable until, and I'm summarising here, these 3 plus another woman, Helena, end up in the woods outside the city, and outside of society, and after a magical night away from the pressures of their community, and maybe some fairies too, the lovers end up in new pairings, ones they're happy with. Demetrius is Harry, Hermia is Gwen, and Peter is Lysander. Now, this is a fairly loose and superficial fit, but by floating A Midsummer Night's Dream in front of us, all the way back in Identity Crisis, the show's nudging us with the idea that if you're with the wrong person, the only way to really be happy is to change things. But, and here's the idea I'm excited about, the presence of A Midsummer Night's Dream in the show might be more than just foreshadowing. Let me explain. If we look at the forest setting of A Midsummer Night's Dream symbolically, if we approach the magical transformative properties of the forest not as fairy magic, but as representative of psychological or social conditions, things get interesting. You could relatively easily view the forest outside of Athens as an example of Michel Foucault's concept of heterotopia, that is, as a somehow placeless zone, which, by virtue of its complex liminal position on the peripheries of both civilization and wilderness, a place of play and a place of fear, permits utopian social interactions and behaviours. You could develop this further and take a Freudian approach and argue that the forest functions as a place where the superego holds no power and the id reigns supreme. That is, in the forest, the lovers are outside of their normal social structures, and so can transform themselves and act on their desires in ways they'd never let themselves in regular society. Any way you slice it, the forest is a transformative setting because it isn't Athens, it isn't regular life for the people who run away into it. And I wonder if we see a similar transformative power in the ritual of the school play and its performance. This play is something of a transgressive space, where the popular jocks and the theatre kids are literally on level ground. It's an environment where hormonal teenagers are acting out stories of love and desire for the world to see, a stark contrast to the deeply secret romantic woes many of them are going through. And by buying into this imagined world for a few hours, both the actors on stage and the audience watching them sort of step into that Athenian forest themselves, step into a world where they're free to consider their own happiness, their own desires, and who they really are, without that constant awareness of what their society, what their peers would think, and the accompanying facades they've built for themselves. It's in this imagined space of introspection and social freedom that Gwen and Liz realise, alongside Shakespeare's characters, that there's something deeply wrong with their relationships, that the person they're with might not be the right one for them. Notably, Peter and Harry don't get these moments of realisation in this episode, because they're outside the ritual space of the theatre which at this point is something of a heterotopia itself. With all this in mind, I think the thematic relevance of A Midsummer Night's Dream to this series goes beyond mere foreshadowing. It doesn't even just serve as an exploration of identity and the self. No, the play's the thing which allows these characters to take action and grow. So the school play in Spectacular Spider-Man isn't just a minor throwaway subplot, it's a crucial part of the build-up to this show's finale. It weaves a misleading narrative, linking Harry and the Goblin, it highlights the show's central themes, it foreshadows the romantic switcheroo of the finale, and it may even have created the imagined space of self-reflection necessary in Gwen's mind for that switcheroo to happen in the first place. You can take or leave that last bit, it's a bit of a pretentious point to try and make, but it's a thought which occurred to me on my last rewatch, and I thought it might be fun to include. But hey, even if we're just talking about the narrative impact and the foreshadowing, I think it's fair to say that Spectacular Spider-Man engaged with this play in a way which goes beyond the superficial, and towards a genuinely smart example of modern Shakespeare reception. But what do you think? Are you on board? And are there any other similarly smart aspects of the show you'd like me to talk about? Let me know below, and I'll start brainstorming ideas for a follow-up video if this one gets to, say, 1,000 likes. Oh, and also, I snuck a handful of Shakespeare lines and quotes into the script of this episode, so I'll give the first person who spots all of them a special flair in my Discord server, which is linked in the description. And let me also just plug the Pillar of Garbage Twitter I recently set up. Follow me and there's no limit to the amount of ratios we'll be able to pull off. But yeah, thanks for watching, and a big thank you to all of my patrons on screen now, especially Ian Fifield.